Hello everybody, I'm Kate Cass, and welcome to our edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about the Ducktales episode, The Life and Crimes of Scrooge McDuck. Before I get to the synopsis or anything else, I just gotta say that it's weird that this reboot debuted 4 years ago this month, and now here I am, covering the penultimate episode of the series. We're almost at the end, guys. But enough musing, let's focus on the subject of this video, where Scrooge and Louie are whisked away to the Karmic court, where the richest duck in the world stands trial to weigh the good actions of his life against the bad. The problem is that the witnesses called are all his arch enemies, or the most notable ones anyway. With Louie defending him, can Scrooge prove he's the hero everyone thinks he is, or will his supposed crimes outweigh all else? Well, the setup is very Ducktales. We can't have Scrooge on a normal trial. No, we gotta have a cosmic court that literally weighs his life choices. This is a trope that's been around for a while. This is a story that can lead to a lot of introspection and dissect a character's actions, even if they are labeled as a good guy with, for the most part, a cartoonishly over-the-top rogues gallery. I do consider this something of a curtain call for Scrooge's most well-known villains, especially after a whole season of having them push off to the side to make room for Fowl. Glomgold's only been in the season once before this, and I don't think we've seen Beagle until now. That's ridiculous. So after so much neglect, it was nice to see them all featured here. There's not really anything else going on in this episode beside the trial, so let's go through each villain's testimony one by one, beginning with
Glomgold!
Now, we know Scrooge played a part in shaping Glomgold's life of crime already, with the mishandling of paying a young Duke Baloney properly many years ago, which they do bring up.
Haven't we all heard enough about how I wronged Duke Baloney as a kid?
But this time, we discover that Glomgold wasn't always the sad, pathetic billionaire in Scrooge's shadow. He used to be beloved in the eyes of the public. How, I have no idea. I mean, I love Glomgold, but not for any of the reasons that would warrant public affection. But Glomgold's testimony is about when that changed, during a treasure hunt Glomgold did on live TV. According to the newscaster following him around on the expedition, we're about 30 years in the past in this flashback. 1987 to be specific. Get it? So it's tough to tell where we are with Scrooge timeline-wise. We haven't quite hit hermit businessman yet since he's hunting for treasure, but we're definitely pre-Donald and Della, before he sets out on adventures for the fun of it. Here, Scrooge drops in on Glomgold's quest just to beat him and add another piece of treasure to his net worth. But this escapade seems to show the true colors of both of its participants. Scrooge is called unapproachable and miserly, and he seems to flaunt that reputation while keeping his eyes on the prize, until a bunch of traps are set off that put the reporters in danger, which forces Scrooge to use his wits to save them, an action that leads to Scrooge becoming known as the hero we know him as now. Meanwhile, Glomgold's obsessive behavior and paranoia caused him to not think his actions through, and thus expose his selfish nature, destroying his reputation. Scrooge may be selfish and condescending towards Glomgold, but Glomgold's downfall was caused by his own obsessive behavior. We've even seen that he could live a happy, fulfilling life if he let that go, but this is another in a long list of moments that shows that he just can't. And unless Scrooge is willing to give him a good knock on the head, that is not his fault. Let's move on to the next witness, Beagle, which comes with a very interesting flashback, since we're going much further back in time for this one, when the Beagle family apparently had the run of the town that would later become Duckburg, with Beagle's father as top dog, which means that this flashback gives us a young Beagle, scrappy and adorably scary. There's just something about this I love that I can't quite articulate. Maybe it's just because of how perfectly it fits her, I don't know. The incident she's here to testify about is when Scrooge moseys into this rundown town and tries to buy it. Now, this could have had some disturbing and possibly unintentional hints of a rich capitalist chasing people off their rightful land, but thankfully it is implied that the Beagle stole this land first from the original dwellers of Fort Duckburg, so dodge that bullet. In true cartoon fashion, this property dispute is resolved not through diplomacy, not through months if not years of lawyers negotiating, but through arm wrestling, where Scrooge discovers that Pappy Beagle is cheating at the competition, because of course he is, he's a Beagle boy, that's what they do. So while Scrooge could have been a bit more humble in victory, him sussing this cheater and swindler out was hardly the wrong thing to do. Like getting the land of Duckburg back, he just righted a wrong. Unlike Ma Beagle, who even as a little girl not only greatly approved of her father conning people, but takes over the family herself the second his scheme was exposed, which is pretty hilarious to me. She becomes the monarch of the family when everyone around her was older and taller, but that just shows how much of a leader she is. This is getting weird. The point is that, as Louis explains, Ma Beagle was already rotten to the core before this happened. She likely would have become a crook and a cheater just like her pappy, but without Scrooge's interference, she and her family would have had more power. It's clear that her upbringing made her a criminal, not Scrooge. So while this is a bit more of a complex case than Glomgold's, there aren't many shades of gray here. The real gray areas come when a familiar figure in black and purple flies into the courtroom. The story you've all probably been anxiously sitting there waiting for me to talk about, Magica dispels testimony. Life and Crimes of Scrooge McDuck tends to be a very divisive episode, and I'll go into why later, but most agree that Magica has a pretty damning case against Scrooge. And you can tell right away from his reaction as she's called to the stand. That is the look of a man who knows he is screwed.
Your Honor, I object!
And why is that?
Because it's devastating to my case!
Overruled.
Good call!
So what is Magica's story? As if most of you who click on this video don't know. Well, it involves the fact that Magica had a brother, Poe, played surprisingly by Martin Freeman. I wouldn't have pegged him for a voice actor, but he does a pretty good job.
I'll expect 15 gallons of goat milk by sunup.
What a delightful compromise.
People were very excited to see Poe make his Ducktales reboot debut. Once again, I can't share in the excitement. I'd never heard of this guy before, but apparently he's from the original show, so yay. But Poe is kind of a weird name, isn't it? At least compared to Magica? What was the logic there? As this episode was being promoted, this was by far the part that fans gravitated to the most, anxious to see the role he'd play in the story. This flashback does a great job introducing the character and establishing the role he played with Magica in the past. The two ruled over a small village with the aid of their combined magic. Possibly the same one the Phantom Blood is from, I'm not sure. With Magica being the more creative and impulsive of the pair, and Poe being more logical and sensible in how they dealt with the villagers. Though it's important to know that they were equally maniacal. Enter Scrooge, who gets caught in a spell cast by the two meant to lure treasure to them thanks to his #1 dime, ready to fight the sadistic siblings for their treasure to prove a point about earning riches rather than taking them, which is certainly a noble sentiment that lines up with some of Scrooge's best traits, being heroic and honorable and making your fortune square. And like with the other flashbacks, this is where Magica shows her true colors. Despite her brother's objections, Magica wants to take out Scrooge her way, wanting to prove she's the strongest magic user there is by stealing Poe's amulet and wielding both of their magic herself. This fits very well with what we already know about Magica, that she would throw anyone under the bus, even family, to gain more power. So it feels like this testimony is going to fall apart as quickly as the others did. But then, this happened.
Poe?
Oh, he's called Poe because he turns into a rave. Okay. This turn of events may have been obvious to most viewers familiar with Poe, but it's still pretty tragic. The fact that he still protected his sister from the spell, despite being ignored and betrayed by her moments prior, makes this a pretty powerful sacrifice. Even with such a small amount of screen time, Poe quickly became a fan favorite, and it's pretty easy to see how. This sequence does a great job of giving us a good sense of who Poe is with very little dialogue. He only had like 2 conversations. And Magica's attitude towards her brother matches her behavior on the show so far rather well. I totally understand why people wish he was introduced in the reboot sooner, because I would have loved to follow up to this part of Magica's history. Ooh, maybe have Lena discover him and restore part of his personality somehow, even if she can't change him back. That would have been fun. But what really drives this moment home is Magica's reaction. When she realizes what she's done, and that even with a very sincere apology for her actions, she can't fix it. With everything we've seen of Magica in the series, including everything that happened with Lena, it's weird to see her this helpless. This is the first time we see Magica express genuine remorse, and the rest of the flashback is her desperately trying to make things right and get Poe back, but to no avail, with Scrooge being the one who seals the deal.
Please, help! He's flying away!
Sorry, a bit busy at the moment.
I thought bankers were all supposed to be heartless bastards.
Look, I try not to be predictable and include a Sherlock clip in this review, but come on, that one is too perfect. As foreshadowed, this is definitely the most damning incident of the batch. You could easily argue that Magica didn't deserve his help after tormenting this town for so long and trying to steal his treasure, but Magica was willing to give up everything to get her brother back. Maybe if Scrooge had been the bigger person and helped her, she would have changed her ways, realized what was really important. But we'll never know, because Scrooge's actions only led to a lifetime of resentment and obsessive revenge. Maybe not of his own making, because again, Magica did deliver the fatal blast, even if she didn't mean for Poe to be the target, but a set of events he can't say he didn't contribute to. And that's the point of all this. It's the age-old question: do the acts of heroes create more problems than they solve? What part do the heroes have to play in making sure that doesn't keep happening? What keeps the cycle of consequences spinning, and is there a way to slow it down?
Our very strength invites challenge. Challenge incites conflict.
This trial is Scrooge being forced to answer those questions, with a very long lifetime of mistakes that affect the lives of others to answer for, many of which we've seen on the show already, like building something dangerous for his niece as she's about to become a mother, or retrieving ancient artifacts for his own profit, or trying to ruin Christmas out of spite.
I got worse, I got clever.
This is what had a lot of people, including myself, excited for this premise, especially in a season where the big antagonist blames Scrooge for absolutely everything chaotic that has happened since he began his adventures. As I've said before, Scrooge is a stubborn old man set in his ways. The episode even reminds us of this with how defensive he is of his actions during this whole trial. Most of his character development over the course of the series has been challenging his worldview and changing for the better, that it's never too late to grow, which is what leads to Scrooge's resolution here, sincerely apologizing for the part he played in these villains' suffering, also known as the most contested part of the entire episode. Many fans believe that, outside of Magica, Scrooge doesn't owe these people anything. Basically, they are doing what the Karmic court is trying to do, measuring the blame. What we learn in the episode, though, is that it's more complicated than that. Look, you're free to feel how you want about a piece of media. Never take my word as gospel. But if I can be frank here for a minute, I am so sick of having this conversation. How one character is in the right and one character is in the wrong, and that's it. It immediately throws everything into absolutes. It leaves no room for nuance or to make these characters reflect real human behavior. And this is a debate that happens all the time. We've even had this conversation about Ducktales before, and as tired as I am of going over this particular talking point already, this likely won't be the last time we have to. So let me present my case for this argument where it pertains to this episode. That I feel the point of this whole thing is not about punishment, but accountability, to show the effects our actions have on others, framing Scrooge's interactions with his enemies in a new light, and forcing him to re-examine the part he played in them. Yes, all of Scrooge's villains were dirty, rotten, despicable people before he ever interfered, but even if he's the good guy, that doesn't mean he did nothing wrong. He did show up Glomgold and proudly ruin his reputation. He did drive the Beagles off their land and force a change in power. And of course, he picked a petty fight with Magica that led to Poe's transformation, and then he refused to help fix it, gloating all the way. But as we've gone over in this review, the villains are hardly victims here. They made their own choices and suffered their own consequences. We can't control the actions or feelings of others, nor should we be responsible for their choices, but we can control our own. We should always try to be treated the way we would want to be, and what would be in the best interest of others and ourselves. Another example of this complicated conflict is the fact that Louis's opponent during this legal battle is Doofus Drake, showing up in restraints like Hannibal Lecter that for some reason he's released from, who orchestrated this whole thing because Louis was responsible for him losing full control of his inheritance. Now, this is a point people have criticized as well, that the part Louis played was the right thing to do, and this kid is a creepy sociopath who tormented his family with his wealth. And you're absolutely right. But remember, those weren't Louis's intentions at first. The only reason he got involved with Doofus Drake to begin with was because he wanted to get in with the rich kids. Yeah, it's great that he backed out and helped the Drakes, but Louis's intentions were hardly pure from the beginning. And again, it created a domino effect that toppled into this cosmic courtroom where Scrooge is in danger of losing everything. Scrooge says this at the beginning of the trial.
I never wronged anyone who didn't wrong me first.
And if you ask me, that is a poisonous mindset. It's the they started it attitude. Yes, some people are just horrible and do not deserve your grace or forgiveness, but hold resentment for too long and it can be used to excuse your own actions because the other side was worse. After all, you don't get this many sworn enemies by doing nothing wrong, and if Donald is to be believed, Scrooge has a lot of them.
Your new job is with my sworn enemy?
I can't keep track of all your sworn enemies.
Let me put it this way. Just because someone has done something worse than you have doesn't make your actions altruistic. Being the bigger person is admitting fault, even when it's not equal fault. To take the steps to make things better before they get worse. And I truly believe that we desperately need this lesson nowadays. That's where Scrooge and Louis come out on top in this whole situation. While the villains continue to play victim and believe their actions are fair because Scrooge wronged them, they acknowledge their own wrongdoings before it escalates into something far worse than it already has. In fact, the valuable thing Scrooge gained from these experiences that they testified about is when he learned something from them. To extend a hand to help someone with or without reward, to think outside the box and find clever ways to solve a problem, to stand for his principles in the face of villainy, and to realize that no matter how long he's lived, there's still room for improvement. Now that said, there is a smaller percentage of fans who have problems in the other direction, that this episode didn't address all of Scrooge's actions that wronged others, and that he got away with just an apology. Well, I will say again that this isn't so much about weighing the blame as it is what it means to self-reflect on those actions. This, I feel, holds a bit more water. Yes, apologizing does make a difference, as it shows remorse for your actions, and I do believe Scrooge's apology was genuine, but so do actions to make up for the things you're apologizing for, especially with this whole plot point they bring up that Scrooge exploited the villagers turned to goats by Magica for profit. That's not a good look on you, Scrooge. And I could see how that would leave a bad taste in some viewers' mouths, as the practice of apology with no attempt at reformation has become oh so common. However, if there is a conscious effort to answer for those actions and make amends, he doesn't deserve to be buried or lose everything for those thoughtless incidents. After all, this isn't the first time Scrooge's businessman side has been humbled, realizing the importance of reaching out and sharing the wealth. If this episode had a bit of an epilogue maybe to demonstrate the steps Scrooge would take to make up for the mistakes and short-sighted actions of his past, even if it was a quick one, this point would be much easier to dispute. As for what we got, does his apology make up for all of his mistakes, especially that whole monetizing the misfortune of low-class villagers? Not quite. But it's a step. And realizing that you are not without fault, that your way isn't always the right way, is the first step towards making amends and doing better next time. That, I think, is the most important takeaway. This isn't Scrooge getting away with the hurt he's caused or being forced to apologize to people who don't deserve it. It's him taking the steps to be more responsible with how he deals with the people around him. To not be known for his mistakes, but to recognize them and strive to be better.
I don't want to be defined by the mistakes I made, but rather by the humility of admitting them.
Overall, The Life and Crimes of Scrooge McDuck may be a divisive episode, and by no means a perfect one, but I'd say it's a very important one. It's a tried and true premise with a lot of exciting potential that the episode definitely explores enough of. It was great to see all the iconic villains one last time before the big finale, as their presence was deeply missed on my end. The stories told throughout the trial were interesting, and while you could argue over how well they delivered it, I do think the overall theme is an important one, and one that can get across to an audience. That, one more time, just because someone else's actions are worse doesn't make your actions altruistic. Even if, yes, there are a couple of missed opportunities with the premise, especially considering the history of the defendant. I think the only big thing I would have done differently with this episode is had it earlier in the series. This honestly would have fit perfectly into season 2, with the focus being around both Louis and Scrooge. Plus, it has a lot of amazing follow-up potential. But since this is the penultimate story story of the series, we'll never see that. And I know there are other episodes in season 3 where people wish there was more time and episodes for follow-ups, but out of all of them, this feels like it's the one that needed that the most. It actually would have been a great lead into season 3 rather than coming in right at the end. But that said, I do think some people were more critical of this episode than was warranted, or rather, not critical enough. Because critical doesn't necessarily mean negative when it comes to thinking or reviewing, it just means analyzing and evaluating something. There was some negative criticism that did just that, and does show some of the episode's imperfections, but a good amount of it that I saw spoke to a larger issue of playing the blame game among fictional characters without allowing fiction to explore the complexities that can come with human behavior. Yes, even with cartoon ducks. Again, not the first time we've had this conversation about this show. If you were disappointed with the life and crimes of Scrooge McDuck because you think it came too late in the show, or that they could have delved into the moral crimes Scrooge has committed in the past, and whether his reputation is a good thing or a bad thing a bit more, I get it. I somewhat agree, and completely sympathize with your judgment. But if you're gonna yell about who really deserved apologies and be defiant about how much each individual was at fault for whatever action, the episode is literally about how hard it is to weigh the effects of those actions, and to pin all that blame on one single person. Perceived superiority like that is part of the problem, and I kindly ask you stick to that corner of the internet who still blames Star-Lord for dooming everyone in Infinity War. It's a fine corner. A lot of people will agree with you. Just don't expect me to be one of them. But in the end, while it certainly has its fault, I find this episode... Yes! Just got an Ace Attorney reference in there right at the end. Speaking of the end, next time we talk about Ducktales, we'll be ending this 3-year-long adventure on my channel with one last adventure. Let's make it a good one. Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what you think of this episode in the comments below. That's why the series is called Let's Talk About. I want to give a very special thanks to my patrons who help support my content, including David L. Sproul, Sebastian Canino of Sinmageddon Reviews, Chelsea A. Crandall, Hawk Hero, Crowless, and Jinx Productions. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my other social media if you'd like to follow me anywhere else. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you guys next time.